have played piano at 41 weddings, 16 engagement parties, and one funeral I still don't like to discuss. And I have never once been thanked by name. That is the job. You are furniture that happens to make sound. You are the harp in the corner of the painting nobody looks at, because they are too busy looking at each other, or at themselves, or at the way the chandelier throws light on the diamonds they paid for with money that will outlive them. So when I sat down at the grand piano in the Ashford room of the Laurent Meridian Hotel on a Saturday night in October, I did what I always do. I found the bench's sweet spot. I settled my spine. I let my hands hover an inch above the keys until the string quartet finished its warm-up chatter, and then I began playing something inoffensive and lovely that would not interrupt a single conversation about mergers or trust funds or who was sleeping with whom. 240 guests. I'd counted the place settings earlier, the way I always do, because knowing the size of a room helps me choose how loud to be invisible. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain. A champagne tower stood at the center of the room, 6 feet of stacked coupe glasses catching the light. White orchids everywhere, so many that the room smelled faintly of church. Cameras with long lenses lined the far wall, credentialed by a publicist I'd seen backstage, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. This was not a wedding. This was the party before the wedding, the one where a company announces a merger disguised as a marriage, and everyone in attendance understood the assignment. I had been booked through an agency that specializes in what they call quiet elegance, which means I play Chopin nocturnes softly enough that men in dinner jackets can discuss quarterly earnings without raising their voices. I had been told, specifically, not to draw attention to myself. The email from the event coordinator had actually used those words. Please ensure the pianist maintains a low profile and does not engage with guests unless addressed directly. I remember thinking, not for the first time, that I had built an entire adult life around the art of being furniture. The bride-to-be entered at 8:15. I knew her the moment the doors opened, though I would come to understand later that the woman I saw and the woman I knew were not, in that instant, the same person. Evangeline Laurent moved through a room the way water moves around a stone, not touching anything, not slowed by anything, simply present and inevitable. She wore ivory, which on anyone else would have looked bridal, and on her looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back so severely that not a single strand dared to move. The press called her the Glass Queen, and I understood immediately why. She had the specific, terrible beauty of something you are not allowed to touch. Beside her walked a man I assumed was Adrian Wycliffe, because he had the posture of someone who has never once doubted he belonged in a room. He was handsome in the particular way of men whose tailors are better than their personalities. He kept a hand at the small of Eva's back, not affectionately, but the way you'd rest a hand on a railing, for balance, for show, for the photograph. I kept playing. That was the job. I noticed the way Eva's eyes moved across the room in slow, methodical passes, cataloging exits the way I catalog seating counts. I noticed she accepted a champagne glass and did not drink from it. I noticed that when people laughed near her, she laughed a half-second late, like someone translating a joke from a language she'd once been fluent in and had mostly forgotten. There was something in the register of her voice, when she thanked a waiter for refilling water she also wasn't drinking, that snagged at me the way a familiar smell can stop you cold in a grocery store aisle. I couldn't place it. I told myself it was nothing. Rich people's voices all start to sound alike after enough events, that particular cadence of never having been interrupted. Around 9, I noticed she had started looking at the piano. Not at me, at the piano. The way you might look at a door in a room where you're trapped. She looked twice during the toasts, once during the string quartet's break, when I filled the silence with something of my own, a habit I allow myself only when no one important is listening. 3 minutes of a melody with no name, notes I'd been circling back to for years without ever finishing. I stopped myself halfway through, the way I always do, and went back to Chopin. I did not know then that she had heard it. At 9:40, a young woman in a Laurent Meridian staff blazer approached the piano and set down a small folded card. "Request for the toast," she said. "They'd like something original." Ms. Laurent's grandmother specifically asked. I opened the card. It read only, "Something of your own. The unfinished one is fine." I stared at it long enough that the runner shifted her weight, waiting. There was no way for anyone in this room to know about the unfinished one. I had never performed it publicly. I had played it exactly once for another human being, in the dark, during a blackout, 6 years ago, in a boutique hotel 3 miles from where I now sat, for a woman I had known for one night and never seen again. I told myself it was a coincidence of phrasing. I told myself Colette Laurent, whoever she was, simply meant play something you wrote. I told myself a great many reasonable things, and then the room quieted for the toast, and Adrian raised his glass, and someone gestured toward me, and there was nothing left to do but play. So I played it. The unfinished melody. 6 years of carrying half a song around like a stone in my pocket, and I let it out into a ballroom full of strangers because a card told me to, and because some reckless, buried part of me wanted, just once, to stop being furniture. I felt the room shift before I understood why. Conversations didn't stop. Conversations at events like this never fully stop, but they thinned, the way a fog thins when the sun finds a gap in it. And then I heard, very close to the piano, the sound of glass striking marble. I looked up. Eva Laurent stood 3 feet from the piano bench. Her champagne glass shattered at her feet, foam already fading into the pattern of the floor, and her face had come apart in a way that no society photograph had ever captured. She was staring at my hands like they belonged to a ghost. "Where did you learn that?" she said. Not loud, almost nothing. But I heard it because she said it the way you'd say something you had rehearsed for years without ever expecting to need it. I stopped playing. My hands went still on the keys, and in that silence, in that ballroom of 240 of the most powerful people in the city, I heard myself say, "A hotel, during a storm, a long time ago." "Eve," she said. Nobody had called me that in 6 years. Nobody but a woman I'd known for one night, who told me her name was Eve, who I had assumed was lying, the way people traveling incognito often lie, and who had left before dawn without a surname, without a number, without anything but a scrap of staff paper with 4 bars of music written in a hand I would have recognized anywhere. "You're Eve," I said, and it wasn't a question, because I finally understood that the strange familiarity in her voice all evening had not been imagination. It had been memory, trying to surface through 6 years of static. She turned away from me before I could say anything else. She turned toward the room, toward Adrian, toward 240 faces now fully, helplessly focused on the woman who had just dropped a glass in front of the woman playing piano, and she said, clearly, in a voice that did not shake even though her hands, I noticed, were trembling at her sides, "I can't do this." Adrian's face went through several expressions very quickly, none of which he let land. "Eva, I'm sorry," she said, and I understood, watching her, that the apology was not performative. It cost her something to say it in front of this many cameras. I have spent 6 years agreeing to a life I did not choose, and I just heard 4 bars of a song that reminded me what it sounds like when I do choose something. "I can't marry you, Adrian. I'm sorry. I should have known this before tonight. I should have known this years ago." The room did what rooms like that do. It did not gasp, exactly. That would have been too honest a reaction for people so well trained. But there was a rustling, a rearranging, the sound of 240 phones simultaneously deciding whether it was appropriate to start filming. Somewhere near the back, a camera flash went off, and then several more, machine gun fast, and I understood with a lurch of pure horror that I was in the frame of every single one of them. I did not wait to be photographed further. I stood, closed the fallboard over the keys with more force than the instrument deserved, and walked. Did not run, because running would have made it worse, but walked very fast, in the specific gait of a woman trying not to look like she is fleeing, through the service door behind the bandstand, down a corridor that smelled like bleach and warming trays, past 3 startled catering staff, and out into the loading dock, where I stood in the cold October air and shook. Behind me, I heard the door open. Celeste. I hadn't told her my name. I turned, and Eva Laurent stood in the doorway in her ivory dress, no coat, her breath visible in the cold, looking at me like I was the only stable object in a room that had just tilted sideways. "Don't," I said. "Don't follow me. You don't get to detonate your own life in front of 200 cameras and then follow me out a service door like we're the ones with something to explain. I know your name, she said, quietly, like it was the only true thing she had left to offer. Julian looked you up the moment you started the request card. I've known your name for 11 minutes, and I've known your hands for 6 years. You don't know me at all, I said, and I meant it as an accusation, though even as I said it, I understood it wasn't quite true, and that was the most frightening part. You knew a woman named Eve for one night in the dark. I knew a stranger who left before I woke up. That's not knowing someone. That's a story you tell yourself, so the ending feels less lonely. She flinched. Actually flinched, like I'd struck her, and for one disorienting second, the Glass Queen was just a woman standing in a loading dock in the cold, with her makeup starting to smear at the corner of one eye. I'm not asking you for anything, she said. I just needed you to know I recognized you. I've been trying to find that melody again for 6 years. I didn't know it would find me back. Well, it did, I said. And now I'm going to be a headline. So congratulations, I suppose, on your honesty. I hope it was worth it. I left her standing in the cold. I took a service exit onto the street, walked 4 blocks in heels that were not made for walking, and did not cry until I was safely inside a cab, where the driver kindly said nothing while I fell apart in his back seat. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. By morning, I was a headline. Mystery pianist linked to Laurent engagement collapse. Who is the woman who stopped a billion-dollar wedding? Someone had found my old faculty photo from the community college where I'd taught piano for 2 miserable semesters. Someone had found the name of the failed composition competition I'd entered 9 years ago and lost. Badly, in a way that still made my stomach clench to remember. Someone had found my apartment address, which meant that by noon there were photographers on the sidewalk below the music shop I live above, and my landlord, Mr. Feldstein, had to physically stand in his doorway and tell them to leave his tenant alone. My sister Noelle showed up at 2 with a bag of groceries and an expression that suggested she had already read everything. So, she said, setting the bag on my kitchen counter, which is also my dining table, which is also occasionally my desk. You're famous. I'm a scandal, I said. There's a difference. Semantics. She started unpacking, which is Noelle's way of managing crisis. She cannot sit still with bad news. She has to be doing something with her hands. A trait I understand better than most people, because I share it, just with piano keys instead of groceries. Tell me what happened, and don't give me the sanitized version you gave the 2 reporters who called my cell this morning, somehow. I told her. All of it, the card, the melody, the shattered glass, the loading dock. Noelle listened with the particular stillness she uses for patients in recovery, which is what she does for a living, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So she recognized you, she said finally, after 6 years, from 4 bars. Apparently. And she called off her wedding in front of 200 people. Also apparently. Noelle leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Celeste, I need you to hear this the way I mean it, not the way it's going to sound. That's either the most romantic thing that's ever happened to anyone I know, or it's a billionaire having a very public crisis and using you as the excuse, because you're safer to blame than her own life. Those aren't mutually exclusive, I said. No, Noelle agreed. They're not, which is exactly why you need to be careful. She didn't ask you if she could blow up her engagement using your face as the reason. She just did it. That's not a small thing, Cel. That's a woman who is used to making decisions about other people's lives without checking first. I thought about that for a long time after Noelle left. I thought about it while I ignored 4 calls from unknown numbers and 2 emails from the event agency informing me, with a coldness that stung more than I expected, that they would no longer be able to place me for a while given the visibility of recent events. I thought about it while I sat at my own piano, an upright I'd bought secondhand a decade ago, with a sticking B-flat and a sound nothing like the Laurent Meridian Steinway, and played nothing at all, just sat with my hands on the keys, not pressing. The flowers arrived the next morning. Not a small bouquet, An absurd, room-filling arrangement of white orchids that made my studio apartment smell like the ballroom I'd fled 2 nights before. There was no card. I called the florist, got a name, Laurent International's corporate account, and sent the entire arrangement to the hospital wing, where my father used to receive treatment, care of a nurse Noelle knew, because I did not want orchids in my apartment, reminding me of a night I was still trying to survive. The second gift was worse. An envelope, hand-delivered, containing a check with more zeros than I make in 8 months, and a note in handwriting I now recognized instantly. For the disruption to your work. I'm sorry for the position I've put you in. E.L. I tore the check in half and mailed it back to the address on the envelope without a note of my own, because I did not trust myself to write one that wouldn't say something I'd regret. She came herself 4 days later. Not to my apartment. I think even Eva Laurent understood that would have been a line too far. But to the rehearsal studio I rent by the hour in a converted warehouse near the river, the kind of place where the radiators clank and the upright piano is older than I am, and out of tune in a way I've grown fond of, because it forces me to actually listen instead of relying on perfect intonation to do the emotional work. I heard the door before I saw her, because the studio door sticks and has to be shoved, and most people don't know that, and there was a very undignified thud, followed by a very quiet, very controlled, "Oh, for God's sake," which I recognized even muffled through drywall. I opened the door myself. She stood there in the hallway, in jeans and a plain wool coat. No entourage, no publicist, no Adrian. Hair down for what I suspected was the first time in a public appearance in years, looking entirely unlike the woman who had shattered a champagne glass on a marble floor. "You returned my check," she said. "You noticed." "I noticed everything you did," she said, and there was something in the flatness of her voice that told me this was not flirtation. Not yet, but simple, exhausted honesty. I've spent 4 days noticing everything, because it's easier than facing my grandmother, my board, and 40 voicemails from Adrian's lawyer. "That sounds like a you problem," I said, which was cruel, and I knew it was cruel even as I said it, but I was still angry, and anger felt like the only safe place to stand. She didn't argue. She looked, instead, past me into the studio, at the ancient upright with its water-stained lid, and something crossed her face that I couldn't name yet. Not pity, not judgment, something closer to recognition. "May I come in?" she asked. "You can say no." I let her in. I don't fully know why, even now, except that some stubborn part of me wanted her to see exactly what her 4 bars of music had cost me to protect for 6 years. Not glamour, not a concert hall, just a cold studio with a broken bench I fixed myself with a strip of duct tape and a prayer. She noticed the bench immediately. "That's broken." "It's fine." "It's genuinely not fine. One leg is shorter than the others. How do you sit on this?" "Very carefully," I said, and something in my voice must have carried the ghost of a laugh, because she looked at me like I'd handed her something warm. "May I fix it?" "You're a billionaire. You don't fix piano benches." "I have hands," she said, mildly, and rolled up her sleeves, and knelt down next to a bench she had no earthly reason to care about, and asked the studio manager, who had appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man witnessing a UFO landing, for a screwdriver. I watched Evangeline Laurent, chairwoman of Laurent International, spend 20 minutes on her knees tightening a wobbling bench leg, while I stood there with my arms crossed, furious at how much I did not want her to leave. "There," she said finally, standing, brushing dust from her jeans. "It should hold now." "Thank you," I said, and meant it, and hated that I meant it. "I'm not here to buy your forgiveness," she said. "I tried that with the check, and you tore it in half, which, for what it's worth, was the correct response, and I should have known better than to send it. I'm here because I owe you an actual apology, not a financial one, and I wanted to say it to your face instead of hiding behind a lawyer or a publicist the way I've hidden behind people my entire life." I said nothing. I let her have the silence, because I wanted to see what she would do with it, and because some petty, wounded part of me wanted her to work for this. "I took something private," she said, "and I made it public, without asking you, in front of 200 people and a room full of cameras. I told myself in the moment that I was being brave, that I was finally choosing something real. But bravery that costs someone else without their consent isn't bravery. It's just recklessness wearing a nicer coat. I'm sorry, Celeste. I should have found you privately. I should have asked what you wanted before I turned your melody into a headline. It was, I will admit, exactly the apology I had needed to hear, and hearing it did not fix anything. But it cracked something open in the wall I'd been building for 4 days. Why did you do it? I asked. Really? Not the version for the cameras, the real version. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the broken bench she'd just fixed. Because I heard 4 bars of a song I've been carrying around for 6 years like a splinter I couldn't get out, and I understood, all at once, standing in that ballroom, that I was about to marry a man I respect and do not love, in a life I inherited rather than chose, and the only time I have ever felt like myself was one night during a blackout with a stranger who never told me her last name. I panicked. I'm not going to dress it up as more noble than that. I panicked, and you were standing there, and the truth came out before I could stop it. That's not romantic, I said. That's a breakdown you had in public, and I got caught in the blast radius. Yes, she said simply. That's also true. Both things can be true. I looked at her. Really looked. The way I look at a piece of music I'm trying to understand before I play it. And I saw, under the composure, someone who had clearly not slept, who had a small bruise-colored shadow beneath one eye, who was standing in a cold rehearsal studio in jeans, because some part of her had wanted, badly, to be somewhere no one would recognize her. I need you to understand something, I said. I'm not a symbol of your freedom. I'm not a reward for finally being honest with yourself. If you want to know me, actually know me, not the 4 bars of a song I played once 6 years ago, you're going to have to do it slowly, and you're going to have to ask before you do things that affect my life. And you cannot fix this with a piano bench and an apology and expect me to fall into your arms because it makes a good story. I don't expect anything, she said. I would like the chance to earn something. That's different. I didn't answer that. I walked her to the sticking door and shoved it open for her, because I knew the trick and she didn't, and she paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, she said, I never forgot the melody. I taught myself pieces of it, badly, on a piano no one knew I owned. I want you to know that before you decide what to think of me. She left. I stood in the cold studio for a long time after, one hand resting on the newly steady piano bench, and did not know what to do with the fact that I believed her. The next weeks were not a romance. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to tell this story as though the piano bench fixed everything, and it didn't. What happened instead was slower and, I think, more honest than a fairy tale would have allowed. Adrian found me first. He arrived at the music shop on a Tuesday, immaculate, in the way only old money manages to be immaculate on a Tuesday, and asked, with the calm of a man closing a business deal, what it would take for me to give a statement to the press, clarifying that I had no relationship with Eva and had never encouraged her attentions. You want me to lie? I said. I want you to protect yourself, he said. The story right now paints you as a homewrecker. I'm offering you a way to be the innocent bystander instead. That's a gift, Ms. Arden. I don't want your gift. Everyone wants something, he said, not unkindly, which was somehow worse than if he'd sneered. You've spent your career playing background music for people who don't know your name. Don't pretend you wouldn't like to matter to someone, even if that someone is using you. I asked him to leave. He did, eventually, but not before mentioning, with surgical precision, that Eva had spent 2 years after our blackout night, quietly searching for the pianist from the old boutique hotel, and had stopped only when Colette threatened to remove her from the succession plan for the family trust if she continued chasing a fantasy instead of preparing to lead the company. I hadn't known that. I don't think I was supposed to know that. I think Adrian told me, because he believed it would make Eva look unstable, obsessive, unreliable. Instead, it made me understand, for the first time, how long she had been carrying this too. I did not see Eva again for 11 days, and in that silence I learned more about my own feelings than I had in the 4 days of anger that preceded it. I found myself sitting at my piano, composing again. Actually composing, not the polite background arrangements I sold to hotels, but something with teeth in it, something that remembered what it felt like to be 19 years old, and certain I had something to say. I hadn't done that in years. Not since the rejection that had ended my concert career before it began. Not since my father's diagnosis had made practical the only word I let myself live by. Noelle noticed before I did. "You're writing again," she said, standing in my doorway one evening, with takeout containers balanced in both hands. "I'm messing around." "Cel, you haven't written a note of your own music in 6 years. Don't call it messing around like it's nothing." She set the containers down and looked at me with the particular seriousness she reserves for moments she thinks actually matter. "Is this about her?" "It's about me," I said, and I meant it, though I understood even as I said it that the two were no longer entirely separable. "Just be careful," Noelle said. "I'm not telling you not to see her. I'm telling you to ask yourself, every single time, whether she wants you or whether she wants what you represent. There's a difference between a woman who loves you and a woman who's using you to prove to herself that she's capable of choosing something real. Sometimes it looks the same from the outside." I carried that with me longer than I wanted to admit. Eva returned on the 12th day, this time to the community music program I volunteer with on Sunday afternoons, a converted church basement where I teach 8 children, ages 7 to 14, the rudiments of piano for whatever they can afford to pay, which is usually nothing, which is fine, because I remember what it was to want lessons and have no way to pay for them. She sat in the back of the room, unannounced, and watched an entire hour of scales and butchered fur-elise attempts without saying a word. And when the last child had been collected by a tired parent, she approached me at the piano. "You didn't tell me you did this," she said. "You didn't ask?" "No," she agreed. "I didn't. I'm trying to ask more. Now it's a slower habit to build than I expected." I closed the fallboard, buying myself a second of composure. "Why are you here, Eva?" "Because I miss you," she said, plainly, without any of the polish I'd expect from a woman who negotiated hostile takeovers for a living. "And because I don't think I've earned the right to say that yet, but I'd rather be honest and unearned than polished and dishonest. I've had a great deal of practice at the second thing. I'm trying something new." I sat with that for a moment. Adrian came to see me. He told me about the search, the 2 years. Something flickered across her face. Not surprised that I knew, I think, but something closer to relief, that the secret was finally out of her hands. "I should have told you myself." "Why did you stop?" "Because my grandmother told me that chasing a woman I'd known for one night was the behavior of someone unfit to inherit the company my great-grandfather built. And because I was 29 and terrified of disappointing the only family I had left. And because some part of me had convinced myself that the night in the blackout was a story I'd told myself to survive a lonely winter, not something real enough to build a life around." She said all of this without breaking eye contact, which I understood, even then, cost her something considerable. I was wrong. I think I knew I was wrong for most of those 2 years. I kept the melody anyway. I taught myself pieces of it on a piano, in a room no one else uses, in a house with 11 other rooms I never enter. "That's a very sad image," I said, "for a woman who owns 11 hotels. 23, actually," she said, and there was the faintest, driest humor in it, the first joke I'd heard her make, and something in my chest loosened at the sound of it. I sat back down at the piano. "Play it for me, what you remember." She hesitated. "I'll get it wrong. I don't care." She sat beside me on the bench, the same broken bench she'd fixed, though this piano was a different, better instrument than the studio upright, and she played, clumsily, 4 and then 6 and then 8 bars of the melody, missing notes, correcting herself, playing with the stiff, self-taught fingering of someone who had learned in secret, without a teacher, purely from memory and stubbornness. It was not beautiful in the way a professional performance is beautiful. It was beautiful in the way a handwritten letter is beautiful. Imperfect, effortful, entirely hers. I put my hand over hers on the keys, not to correct her, just to feel the shape of what she'd built alone, in an empty room for 2 years, and she went very still. "I remembered this part wrong," she said, quietly, not moving her hand from beneath mine. "I always thought it went up here. She played a phrase, and I heard immediately what she'd misremembered. An interval she'd flattened, probably because her ear, untrained, had smoothed the dissonance without meaning to. "You made it kinder than I wrote it," I said. "I wrote it with an ache in it. You gave it hope instead." "Maybe I needed the hope more than I needed accuracy," she said, and looked at me, and for the first time since the ballroom, I let myself look back without armor. We did not kiss that day. I want to be honest about that too, because I think it matters that we didn't rush it, that we let the wanting build instead of resolving it the moment it became inconvenient to wait. But something shifted in that church basement, over a badly remembered melody and a hand resting on a hand that neither of us tried to talk ourselves out of afterward. Over the following weeks, we built something slowly, in stolen hours, between her board meetings and my rehearsals. She came to the diner 2 blocks from my apartment at midnight once, after a merger negotiation had gone 16 hours long, and sat across from me in a vinyl booth eating pancakes at a volume of enthusiasm I hadn't known she possessed. "I don't think I've ever chosen a meal before," she admitted, syrup on her thumb, looking faintly astonished at herself. "There's always a chef, or a host, or an assistant who knows what I like better than I do. I didn't know I liked pancakes until 11 minutes ago." "That's genuinely one of the saddest things you've told me," I said, and she laughed, really laughed, unguarded, a sound I don't think the press had ever captured, and I understood in that moment that I wanted to be the reason she made that sound more often. I visited her at the Laurent Meridian's executive floor exactly once, mostly out of curiosity, and found her standing in furious, controlled combat with a vending machine that had eaten her dollar and refused to dispense a bag of pretzels. Watching Evangeline Laurent, chairwoman of a hospitality empire, jab a vending machine button with the barely restrained violence of a woman who negotiates 9-figure deals before breakfast was one of the funnier things I have ever witnessed, and I told her so, and she told me, with great dignity, to be quiet and help her shake it. We shook it together. The pretzels fell. We ate them sitting on the floor of an executive hallway at 10 at night, and she told me, in fragments, about a childhood defined by tutors and expectations, and a father who died when she was 14, leaving her grandmother's ambitions the only compass she had left. I told her about my own father's illness, about the semesters of teaching I'd hated, about the rejection letter from the concert competition that still lived, folded, in a drawer I hadn't opened in years because I couldn't bear to reread the specific cruelty of the phrase emotionally undisciplined. "That's absurd," she said, furious on my behalf in a way that startled me. "Your composition made me end my engagement in front of 200 people. That's not emotionally undisciplined. That's the most disciplined use of emotion I have ever witnessed." "That's not what discipline means in a concert hall." "Then the concert hall is wrong," she said, with the flat certainty of a woman who had never once had her judgment questioned by anyone who mattered, and I found I did not entirely disagree. Our first kiss happened 3 weeks after the pretzels, in the old boutique hotel where we'd first met, the Windermere, a building Laurent International had quietly acquired years ago and left mostly untouched, scheduled now for a renovation that would strip it of the very details that had made it feel like a hiding place from the world. Eva brought me there on a Sunday evening, the building empty, except for a security guard who let us in, and then discreetly disappeared. "I bought it 2 years ago," she told me, as we walked through dust-sheeted hallways, lit only by the last of the evening light through tall windows. I told the board it was a real estate opportunity. It wasn't. I couldn't stand the thought of it being torn down. I didn't understand why until you played that melody at my engagement party. We found the piano room, the same small parlor where I'd played for her during the blackout, the instrument still there beneath a canvas sheet, slightly out of tune from years of disuse but recognizably itself. I pulled the sheet away and sat down, and Eva stood beside me, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. "I came back the next morning," she said finally, "after the power returned. I wanted to explain myself, tell you my real name, ask for your number. The front desk said the pianist had already checked out. I assumed you'd left because you didn't want to be found." "I waited until checkout," I said, something in my chest going tight at the misunderstanding we'd both carried alone for 6 years. "I waited for hours. I thought you'd already gone. The manager finally told me, The room needed to be cleared. We had missed each other by, it seemed, less than an hour, 6 years ago, in this very building, both of us convinced the other had simply walked away. "I've spent 6 years thinking you didn't care enough to stay," she said quietly. "And I've spent 6 years thinking the same thing about you," I said. We looked at each other in the dim light of a room neither of us had expected to return to, and something in the accumulated weight of the misunderstanding finally broke loose. She reached for me first, or maybe I reached for her. I have played that moment back so many times since that I'm no longer certain who moved first, only that her hand found the side of my face, gentle, testing, and I did not pull away, and then her mouth was on mine, careful at first, asking rather than taking, and I answered by pulling her closer, and the years of static between us finally resolved into something clear. She tasted like the coffee she'd been drinking to survive an impossible week. Her hand shook slightly against my jaw, which surprised me. I had not expected the glass queen to shake, and I understood, kissing her in that dusty, abandoned parlor, that I was not kissing a symbol or a headline or a fantasy. I was kissing a woman who had waited 6 years to finish a conversation, same as I had. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine, breathing unsteadily. "I have wanted to do that since the moment you sat down at that piano at my engagement party," she admitted. "I am sorry it took a ruined engagement and a broken vending machine and 3 weeks of pancakes to get here." "I'm not," I said, and meant it, and kissed her again. We did not leave the Windmere that night until very late, and what happened between the piano room and the door I will keep for myself, except to say that it was slow, and it was chosen, and neither of us hurried toward anything the other wasn't ready to give. And when I finally walked out into the cold with her hand in mine, I felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, entirely unhidden. I wish I could tell you that was the end of the story, that a kiss in an abandoned hotel solved everything, but life is rarely so tidy, and ours was about to get considerably less tidy before it got better. The trouble began, as trouble often does, with a gift that looked, at first, like kindness. I came home one evening to find a letter from the Farron Concert Foundation, an institution I had submitted work to 9 years earlier, the same institution whose rejection had ended my concert ambitions and installed the phrase, "emotionally undisciplined," permanently in my memory. The letter informed me that my new composition, submitted for consideration, had been selected for their winter showcase, one of the most prestigious platforms for emerging composers in the country. I had not submitted anything. I called the foundation, confused, and was told, politely, that my materials had been forwarded by a representative of Laurent International 6 weeks prior, along with a formal introduction from a foundation board member. I sat very still in my apartment for a long time after that call. When I confronted Eva that evening, she did not deny it, which I think, in retrospect, was the only honest thing she could have done, even though it made the conversation so much worse. "I only made sure they listened," she said, standing in my kitchen, careful, the way you'd stand near something you knew was about to break. "I didn't tell them to select you. I didn't influence the panel's decision. I know people who know people, Celeste. That's simply true of my life, and I used that to make sure your work landed on the right desk instead of the bottom of a slush pile." "That's not your decision to make," I said, and I could hear my own voice shaking with an anger that had nothing to do with the foundation and everything to do with 6 years of being told my work wasn't good enough, followed by the discovery that the one time it had finally been recognized, it might not have been recognized on its own merit at all. That's the one thing I needed to do without you. Do you understand that? Everything else in my life right now is tangled up with you. The headlines, the scandal, the way strangers look at me now. This was supposed to be mine, just mine. And you took it, the same way you took the ballroom, without asking. "I only opened a door," she said, and I could see she believed it, which somehow made it worse. "You don't understand the difference," I said, "between opening a door and controlling the building it's attached to. You've spent your whole life owning the buildings, Eva. You don't know what it feels like to walk through a door and not know if it opened because you deserved it or because someone with your last name made a phone call." She didn't argue further. She stood in my kitchen and absorbed the accusation without deflecting it, which I would come to understand, later, was its own kind of growth for her. The old Eva would have explained, justified, produced evidence of her good intentions. This Eva simply said, "You're right. I don't know that feeling. I have never once had to wonder if a door opened because of me or despite me. I'm sorry. I wanted to help and I didn't consider that help, from me, isn't free the way it would be from anyone else. I need space," I said. "I need to withdraw from the showcase. And I need you to not fix that either." "All right," she said. And the word cost her. I could see it cost her. But she didn't fight it. "I'll respect that. I won't call the foundation. I won't call you, unless you call me first." She left. I withdrew from the showcase the next morning, over the baffled objections of the foundation's program director, and I spent the following weeks in a silence I had chosen, and immediately regretted, and could not, out of sheer stubbornness, bring myself to break. The separation lasted 6 weeks. In that time, I learned several things about myself that I would rather not have learned under such lonely circumstances. I learned that my pride and my integrity are not always the same thing, and that I had been using the first to protect myself from the vulnerability of the second. I learned, sitting alone at my piano most nights, that the composition I'd withdrawn from the showcase was good. Genuinely good. Not good because Eva had opened a door, but good because I had finally allowed myself to write something honest again after 6 years of hiding behind other people's Chopin. I learned that Noelle had been right to warn me to ask whether Eva wanted me or the idea of me, and I learned, slowly, painfully, that the answer was more complicated and more real than either extreme. Eva, for her part, did not call. She did not send flowers, or checks, or intermediaries. Julian Cross, her chief of staff, reached out exactly once, on his own initiative rather than hers, to tell me, carefully, the way a man protects a boss he respects without admitting he's doing it, that Eva had turned down a merger with Adrian's family's firm, a deal worth, by his careful estimate, several $100 million, because the terms required her to publicly frame our relationship as a temporary personal disruption unrelated to sound business judgment, and she had refused to say those words about me, even to save the deal. "She didn't ask me to tell you that," Julian said, over the phone, with the dry precision of a man who has spent a career being discreet, and was clearly uncomfortable breaking the habit. "I'm telling you because I've worked for her for 9 years, and I have never once seen her turn down money to protect someone's dignity instead of her own interests. I thought you should know, whatever you decide to do with it." I sat with that information for 2 days before I called her. We met at the community music program, on a Sunday, because it felt like the right place. The place where she'd first watched me be entirely myself, unpolished, unhidden. "I heard about the merger," I said, when the last child had left. "Julian has a big mouth," she said, without heat. "He cares about you." "He does." She sat down on the piano bench beside me, careful, giving me room to close the distance or not. "I meant what I said 6 weeks ago. I don't know the difference between opening a door and controlling the building, but I've spent 6 weeks thinking about it, and I think I'm starting to understand it now, even if I can't promise I'll never get it wrong again." "I withdrew from the showcase," I said. "I know, I didn't interfere." A pause. "I wanted to. Every single day. I want you to know that too, because I think honesty matters more than looking like I handled this perfectly. I drafted an email to the foundation program director at least 6 times and deleted it every time." "Why didn't you send it?" "Because you asked me not to," she said, simply. "And because I'm trying to learn that loving someone means occasionally wanting something desperately and not taking it, if taking it isn't yours to take." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent her entire life certain that money and will and her own considerable competence could solve any problem in front of her, sitting very still, hands folded in her lap, waiting to find out if I would let her back in. "I've been composing," I said, "finishing it. The melody. Can I hear it?" I played it for her, the completed version, 6 years and 1 broken engagement, and 1 withdrawn showcase, and 1 furious kitchen argument in the making. It was not the song I would have written at 23, hopeful and untested. It was not the song I would have written 6 weeks ago, raw with anger. It was something new, built from all of it. The waiting, the misunderstanding, the anger, the return. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "It doesn't sound like waiting anymore," she said finally. "No," I agreed. "It sounds like staying." I had to learn the difference. We did not fall immediately back into each other's arms, though I will admit the temptation was considerable. Instead, we talked, really talked, for hours, about what a relationship between us would need to look like if it was going to survive her world and mine without either of us disappearing into the other. "I want boundaries," I told her. "Real ones. Not boundaries you respect when it's convenient, and override when you think you know better. If I say no, I need it to mean no, even when you're certain your yes would make things easier." "I want that too," she said. "I've spent 36 years being the person who decides. I would like, very much, to practice being the person who asks." "I'm not going to become a Laurent," I added, because it felt important to say plainly. "I'm not interested in galas and hotel openings and being photographed on your arm as a curiosity. I have my own work. It's smaller than yours, and slower, and it matters to me exactly as much as your company matters to you." "I know," she said. "I don't want you to become anything other than what you already are." I fell in love with a stranger at a piano during a blackout because she was the only person who ever spoke to me like I was a person and not an asset. I'd be a fool to try to turn her into an asset now. That was, I think, the moment I understood we might actually survive this. The reconciliation with the showcase came differently than I expected. 2 months later, the Ferrand Foundation's program director called me directly, not through Eva, not through any intermediary, having heard, through channels I never fully untangled, that I had a completed original composition and had once withdrawn from consideration under complicated circumstances. She asked, plainly, if I would submit again, this time under a blind review process the foundation had adopted specifically to address concerns about influence in their selection. I submitted. I did not tell Eva until after I'd heard back, because I wanted, this time, to know the answer belonged entirely to me before I let anyone else celebrate it with me. I was selected, on my own, this time, by a panel that did not know my name until after the decision was made. There were other battles that autumn, smaller ones. Colette Laurent requested to see me. Summoned might be the more honest word, at the Laurent family's coastal property, a beautiful, austere house that Eva had told me she was considering selling, a decision that had apparently caused considerable friction with her grandmother. Colette received me in a winter garden, all glass and pale winter light, and studied me for a long moment before speaking. "You understand what you've done," she said. It was not a question. "I've been told several different versions of what I've done," I said. "Which one are you referring to?" The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You've awakened a version of my granddaughter that I spent 30 years trying to make sure never surfaced. The impulsive version. The version who chooses feeling over duty. That version is dangerous, Ms. Arden, in a world that runs on stability and the confidence of markets." "With respect," I said, "the version of Eva you spent 30 years building was suffocating before I ever sat down at that piano. I didn't create that unhappiness. I just happened to be playing the song that finally cracked it open." Colette was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the gray winter sea. "I gave up a woman once," she said, so unexpectedly that I nearly missed it. "Before I married Eva's grandfather, there was someone else, a singer, if you can believe the cliché, and my family made it very clear that choosing her would cost me everything I had been raised to value. I chose duty. I have spent 50 years wondering, quietly, in rooms exactly like this one, what the other life would have looked like." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be sorry for me," she said, sharper now, though not unkindly. "Be careful with her. That's all I ask. Whatever you decide, be careful with what you've unlocked in my granddaughter, because I don't believe she can survive losing it twice." She did not become an ally that afternoon, not fully, not in any way I could have announced to anyone, but 3 weeks later, an anonymous, beautifully preserved sheet of hand-copied music arrived at my studio, the earliest known fragment of the melody I'd been playing since the blackout, apparently transcribed by a hotel staff member years ago, and kept, quietly, in a Laurent family archive I never learned the details of. There was no note. I didn't need one to know where it had come from. The final showcase performance took place in early spring, at a newly restored concert hall connected, fittingly, to the same community music program where Eva had first watched me teach children badly played scales. The Laurent family had quietly funded the hall's restoration, a decision Eva had made publicly, transparently, through the foundation's standard channels, with no mention of me attached to the gift at all, because by then, we had both learned the difference between generosity and control. That same week, Adrian's family and a faction of the Laurent board had scheduled an announcement of their own, a restructuring proposal that would have required Eva to step back from day-to-day leadership in favor of more stable governance, language everyone understood to mean punishment for a broken engagement, and a scandal that refused to fade from the tabloids. Eva was offered, one final time, an easy way out. Deny that our relationship had influenced her decision to end the engagement, characterize me publicly as a brief and irrelevant complication, and the board's confidence and her position would be restored. She refused. She told me about the offer only after she'd already declined it, which I understood by then to be exactly the kind of restraint she'd been practicing. Not hiding the decision from me, but not making it about me either. Not turning her integrity into a performance for my benefit. The night of my performance, the hall was full. Students from the program in the front rows, their families beside them, a scattering of the same well-dressed guests who'd once watched Eva shatter a champagne glass, all mixed together in a way that would have been unthinkable at the Laurent Meridian 6 months earlier. I looked for Eva before I sat down at the piano, and found her not in the reserved seats near the stage, where the foundation had offered her a place of honor, but in the very back row, alone, unassuming, the way a person sits when they've decided not to make their presence the story. I played the completed composition. I will not try to describe the music itself. Some things are better heard than explained, except to say that it began, as it always had, with the ache of someone waiting for a person who never returned, and it moved, slowly, through anger and silence and misunderstanding, and it arrived, finally, at something steadier. Two people who had learned that returning wasn't enough, that you had to choose, again and again, to stay. When the last note faded, the hall was silent for a long moment before the applause began, and in that silence, I found Ava's eyes in the back row, and she was not performing composure for anyone. She was simply, openly, crying. I said a few words after the applause settled. Not the whole story, not the private parts that belonged only to us, just enough. This piece began as a song about waiting for someone who never came back, I told the hall. It became a song about learning that waiting isn't the same as choosing. Someone I love taught me that the hard way, and I'm grateful for it, even though it wasn't easy to learn. I did not say her name. I didn't need to. Every camera in the room turned toward the back row anyway, and for once, Eva did not flinch away from being seen. She found me afterward, in the small green room behind the stage, and she did not begin with a speech. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the showcase, for the loading dock, for 6 years of not finding you sooner, and for every single time I decided something about your life without asking first. I know I've said it before. I want to keep saying it until it stops being necessary, and even then I imagine I'll still say it, because I don't want to become someone who assumes forgiveness is permanent just because it's been given once. I used my independence as a shield," I said, because it felt important to meet her honesty with my own. I told myself I was protecting my integrity, and sometimes I was, but sometimes I was just afraid of how much I wanted you, and it felt safer to stay angry than to admit I needed someone again, after spending years convincing myself I didn't need anyone at all. "What do you want?" she asked, and there was something in the question, genuine, unhurried, without an agenda already prepared behind it, that told me she meant to actually listen to the answer, whatever it turned out to be. "I want boundaries that hold," I said. "I want you to ask before you fix things. I want my own work, my own name, my own reasons for walking into a room. And I want you, not the version of you that solves problems with money, and not the version of me that performs invisibility so no one asks anything of her. I want the two people who sat on the floor of an executive hallway eating pretzels. I think that's who we actually are, underneath everything else. I can do that, she said. I'd like very much to do that. I kissed her then, in a cramped green room that smelled like flowers and stage dust, with the sound of the audience still murmuring beyond the door, and it did not feel like the end of a story. It felt like the beginning of a much longer, much quieter one, the kind that doesn't make headlines, the kind built out of Tuesday dinners and fixed piano benches, and the slow, deliberate work of choosing each other, over and over, without an audience to perform it for. We did not marry within the year. I want to say that plainly, because I think the rush toward marriage is its own kind of performance, and we had both spent enough of our lives performing things we didn't choose. Instead, we built something quieter and, I think, sturdier. Eva learned to sit in the back of rehearsal rooms without offering notes unless I asked for them. I learned to walk into rooms full of her associates without shrinking, without apologizing for taking up space I'd earned. She came to my performances and sat, sometimes in the front, sometimes in the back, always exactly where I asked her to be. I came to her board dinners exactly as often as I wanted to, and not once more, and she never once made me feel small for declining the ones I skipped. We developed rituals, the way people do when they're finally building a life instead of surviving one. Sunday mornings at the diner, where she has, over the past year, developed an alarming and specific opinion about the correct ratio of syrup to pancake. Tuesday evenings at the community program, where she has, despite her own protests, become genuinely good at helping 7-year-olds understand what a quarter note is. Late nights at my piano, or hers, working through unfinished fragments of melody that we've started, quietly, to write together, not because either of us needs the other's help, but because we've learned that some things are better made in company than made alone. The old boutique hotel, the Windmere, was not sold, and it was not demolished. Eva restored it instead, carefully, preserving the piano parlor exactly as it had been the night of the blackout, and turned the rest of the building into a small performance venue, connected to the community music program, a place where students who could never afford a proper concert hall could perform for people who actually wanted to listen. I performed there again, almost a year to the day after the engagement party that started everything, at the venue's opening. The audience was smaller this time. No cameras from gossip columns, no chandeliers, just students and families, and a handful of people who genuinely loved music, rather than the spectacle around it. I played the completed composition once more, and then, because the evening felt like it deserved one more thing, I played something new, a piece I'd only finished the week before, one I hadn't told Eva about. When the audience had gone, when the last student had been collected, and the last light in the old ballroom had been dimmed to a warm amber glow, Eva joined me at the piano, the way she had a year before, though everything about the moment felt different now, chosen instead of stumbled into, steady instead of shaking. She set something on the closed fallboard in front of me, a small, simply framed piece of paper. I recognized it before I fully looked at it. The original scrap of staff paper, 4 bars of music in her careful, self-taught hand, the note she'd left behind on the morning after the blackout, 6 years and 1 impossible year ago. "I've been carrying this in a drawer for 6 years, she said. I thought it was time it lived somewhere it could actually be seen. It's beautiful, I said, and meant the frame, and meant the melody, and meant, more than either, the 6 years of waiting that had somehow, against every reasonable expectation, led us both back to the same piano. I don't want to propose to you with an audience, she said, quietly, sitting beside me on the bench that had survived a broken leg, and a great deal more than that in the year since she'd fixed it. I've had enough of my life performed for other people. I'd like this part to just be ours. That sounds right, I said. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight, she said. I'm asking if I can keep showing up, at your rehearsals, your Sundays, your unfinished melodies. I'm asking if I can be part of whatever you're building, for as long as you'll let me, without needing it to be announced to anyone but you. I looked at her, at the woman the world still called the Glass Queen, who had once been unreachable by anyone, sitting beside me on a piano bench in an empty ballroom, asking permission instead of assuming it. the way she'd been practicing for a year, patiently, imperfectly, entirely her own. "Yes," I said, "you can keep showing up." She kissed me, slow and certain, her hand finding mine on the keys the way it had that afternoon in the church basement. And when we finally drew apart, I turned back to the piano and began to play. Not the old melody this time, worn smooth now with a year of happiness, but something entirely new, something we were only just beginning, note by note, to write together. For the first time in my life, I was not playing background music for someone else's celebration. I was playing my own, with someone finally, fully listening, and for once, the silence that followed the last note was not empty. It was only waiting for what came next.